So welcome back to Conversations at the Intersection. I am here with Rana el Kaliouby, and she is the CEO of Affectiva and the author of an awesome book called Girl Decoded. Happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Emotional AI. So tell me a little bit about that.
So if you think about human intelligence, it's not just your IQ or your cognitive intelligence that matters, your emotional intelligence matters as well. And I believe that that's equally important for technology. So a lot of the work around AI is focused on the IQ of the AI. And I'm like saying, well, the EQ is equally important. And so we're about marrying the IQ and the EQ and bringing that to our AI.
I mean, so I couldn't agree more. The part of how we're seeing the future and how the future is evolving is this idea of hybrid, right? It's this idea that it's technology plus human, and that's where the magic happens. That's what is needed, but that's also where the true, ultimately, true competitive advantage is going to be. Is that how you see the world?
Absolutely. It's a partnership between humans and machines, and the idea is to augment people's abilities to do things, and not just to be more productive or automate or more efficient, but equally to be more empathetic and more humane, because I think that's very powerful too.
You have a way of actually bringing in emotion into AI. Can you just give a very specific example so people know what you mean when you say that?
Yeah. So when people communicate, only 10% of how we communicate is in the actual choice of words we use. 90% is nonverbal, and it's split equally between your facial expressions, your gestures, and your vocal intonations. So we're all about building algorithms that can capture that 90%. So for instance, we have technology that can track moment by moment with your consent, your facial expressions as you respond to content or as you drive around your car. Imagine if you had emotion AI and we were able to capture in real time the engagement of the audience. And I don't want to, anonymously, I just want to see an aggregated curve or maybe a visualization, emojis, like whatever, that encapsulates the level of engagement, the level of excitement, the level of boredom that an audience has. That would be really amazing information for a presenter or a content creator.
Now, so there's two things that I'm thinking about that's happening, that's been playing out over the past couple of months. Let's take the first one up, which is COVID, which is it basically almost turned everybody into working virtually, or a lot of people into working virtually.
Yeah.
And in that context, we can see somebody, yes, but it is obviously something missing. Right now, I'm looking at you, and I know that it's not the same as if you were sitting right across the table here and we're having this conversation in person. And in particular, in your book, you talk about this idea of an empathy crisis. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the state of the world today, because so much of our communication is mediated through technology, my sense is we have dehumanized each other. And I start with this scene in the book of this story from a couple of years ago of a number of teenagers who literally watch a man drown and record the incident and don't try to step in and help, right? And that says something about our lack of empathy. So I'm concerned about that, and it manifests in big ways like this story, but also in everyday interactions on social media with people being really mean, and just insensitive.
Well, how do you think about the moment that we're in right now? Because the second moment I was going to get into, what's happened over the past couple of months, is George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and how that has really gone from a moment into a movement. We spent a lot of time talking and engaging ourselves with that here at the Medici Group. I mean, we're part of the solution from what we do to sort of help advance the mindset and thinking around that. How does the notion of an empathy crisis play out in that context, in Black Lives Matter, in the moment they're in right now?
I'm very hopeful because I feel like for the first time ever in history, we're all going through this pandemic together. And then added to that, there's all of these, global protests calling for an end or, some solution to all of the systemic injustices. So I feel like we are almost rediscovering empathy in a way that hasn't, it's really not been the case in the past. And I believe there's an opportunity to use that as a catalyst for change and to really celebrate and emphasize diversity and inclusion, which is of course a huge issue in tech, especially in AI. So we need these diverse brains, and we need to underscore the importance of bringing everybody to the table and making sure we're not using this technology to discriminate against people of color. Yeah, it's a very important moment in time to focus on this and drive to action.
Emotion AI, empathy, these are key terms that we talked about so far. But you were kind of sharing that in your experience, VC firms are, well, the response to the word emotion, for instance, was not necessarily as leaning in on it or as excited as they should be. And there might be a particular reason for that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'll preface this by saying I think things are changing, but when we first spun out of MIT, my co-founder, who's a professor at MIT, Rosalind Picard, and myself, went on a fundraising trip, especially Sand Hill Road, the whole Sand Hill Road show. We had, a lot of VC meetings lined up. So I just want you to picture that, like two women scientists, right? We're spinning out of MIT. I was clearly Muslim at the time, so very clearly a minority, like woman, Muslim, immigrant. And we were pitching an emotion company to mostly, and actually exclusively, an older male, white male, VC contingent. So that was so outside of what they were used to seeing. It was really, really high risk. So as you can imagine, it was tough to raise our initial round of funding. We persisted and we were able to raise from top tier investors, but the feedback was always like, they were always super intrigued by the technology, but we were just so different from what they were used to saying that it was hard to raise up. And in fact, we avoided using the word emotion altogether. We would
you avoided using the word emotion altogether. You were like, what do you mean? How did you? Tell me a little bit about that dance.
Well, for starters, we didn't use the word emotion in the company name. We used affect, Affectiva, which is a synonym of emotion.
Yeah, sure.
And if you look at all our early pitch decks, we never mentioned the word emotion. We talk about sentiment, we talk about valence, which is how positive or negative you're feeling, arousal, like experiences. Never emotions. It's only like in the past 4 or 5 years that we coined the term artificial emotional intelligence or emotion AI, and we've totally embraced it and pioneered the category, and I decided we need to own it. And I think there's more celebration that we need a more human-centric approach to technology.
I think you're right. People are definitely recognizing that. Do you think it would have been different if the VC firms themselves had been more diverse?
Yes, 100%. I feel like I feel like a lot more women, like female funders, would resonate with this idea of what we're doing.
Yeah.
I also think just more diverse perspectives would have really helped. And so I've now become a huge advocate and very active volunteer in the area of trying to get more funding to female founders, but also to support female investors, because we need more of them.
This is I think 100% right, and it's great that one is actively engaging in the work of doing so, because I think that is ultimately what is needed. Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Till next time.